what I wanted to talk about was a few of my experiences with king and pawn endgames. These endgames are in particularly, they're so marvelously tricky. And this, of course, is not a king and pawn endgame, but it has a great story to it, so I have to share it with yourselves. Okay, so what this position has been reached very recently in the tournament in Wijk, Holland. And I was the commentator, the online commentator doing broadcasts for the event. And Ivanchuk had been in deep trouble against Jobava for the longest time, but as white, he had really fought himself out of his difficulties and got himself into this crazy position. Ivanchuk advanced the pawn, and I had been spending some of my time looking at what would have happened if the pawn had been captured. The pawn goes down the board, and black gets his king behind the pawn, his rook behind the pawn. But definitely there is at least a draw here for white, because white will always be able to advance his king to d7 and would force black to make a check from behind. So that line of play would not be winning for black. Another interesting line of play would be this one. Takes, rook f5, rook f4, pardon me, attacking the pawn on f5, f5, and rook here. So in this case, you could get a situation where, for example, after king here, king to d6, pawn to b4, it starts getting really wild, like, you know, who's going to win and how would it go? For example, pawn here. There was a funny trick. Rook takes, pawn takes, pawn here. Hold on, no, this isn't, let's say, yeah, pawn here, and takes, yeah, gotta make a queen, and this check. Ooh, yeah. So there was tricks like this, and I had been calculating these tricks when suddenly and very surprisingly, Jobava offered to go into a king and pawn endgame. Now again, black had been better for a very, very long time, and it looked like a very strange decision to go into a king and pawn endgame. When you go into a king and pawn game, it's one of those things you have to be absolutely sure. You're burning your bridges. Either you're lost, won, or draw, and you've got to take precise play. And the first thing that went through my mind was like, okay, why on earth could this be winning for black, right? So I was thinking, okay, so king c6, and how is black going to win this, or what would the result be? So I was trying to analyze this position. At the same time, there were other games, and I was flipping back and forth, and suddenly, bang! In the studio was Ivanchuk. Ivanchuk is white. Ivanchuk had just played the move rook takes a4, and his opponent resigned. Whoa, why did he resign? Why didn't you just take the rook and then see what the opponent was going to do? And I hadn't figured out how black was going to win. How white was going to win, pardon me. And I said, well, welcome, Vassily. Would you share with the audience your game? And Ivanchuk went through the whole game beautifully, eloquently, explaining all the details of the position with a subtle, yeah, it was all good. It was all good. Yeah, and then I said, well, why did the opponent resign? And Vassily went, brrrr. And I said, well, that's really, really nice. Thank you very much. But could you do it one move at a time for the audience? And he did. Now, this position is forced. And think about it for a second. How would you win it if you were white? Like, what moves would you make here? You might consider, for example, a move like f6 to set up a breakthrough with the pawn coming to e6, but that would actually not work because of push, king, king. No, that's definitely not the right method. So what move do you think is the right move? Sir, what do you think?
King to
d3. King to d3. So this makes a lot of sense because what you're going to do is you're going to come roaring around here, but then comes king to d5. And of course black for, actually I apologize. Let me first trade these pawns. Takes, takes, and then king to d5. And so black's idea is, obviously he wants to just grab both of these guys. All right, yes, young man. Never mind, yes, young man. E6, you bet, E6. Okay, well, I don't think I have much choice here. I'll take it. Yes, and now? F6. So this is known as the breakthrough, pawn breakthrough. So now, in order to stop the pawn from promoting, black's king is dragged. Yes, black's king has to move king d6. Okay. So now, what should white do? C4. You bet. So in this position, essentially white has passed pawns that are far, and black has passed pawns that are far away. But it's all a matter of timing. So for example, e5, c5 check, where we can't capture the pawn. King has to move away. King.
Which one you want?
Check.
Take. Okay. No, don't take.
Wait for a second. Exactly. And now you're threatening the queen with check.
Oh,
And your queen with check.
check,
Check.
check.
And white wins. Very, very, very nice. Example of the split pawns.
Queen h8.
Or you could even come all the way back here with the queen and start grabbing all of these pawns too. All right, so that, Ivanchuk explaining the game to me, and when he finishes explaining the king and pawn endgame, he goes, and every good grandmaster would see that right away. Like, oh, thank you very much, Ivanchuk. Very, very, very nice. Insulted on my own show, what can I tell you? So let me just pull up another one.
You wasn't a good grandma.
Well, not in that case. This one was a nice game and a very instructional one. So it was the first round. Gosh, was it really that long ago? Yeah, 1983. I was white, and my opponent was Garry Kasparov. Garry had not yet won the world championship, but he had certainly made his mark in the world of chess. He was already the second highest rated player in the world. And we got to this fairly even position b5, knight d3. He took, and played king d6. And here we were in a king and pawn endgame. And as they say, this was the proverbial move 40, the last move of time control, all right? So I'm white, and essentially I'm juggling two moves. I'm thinking about the move king d4 as well as about the move e4. It's clear that black has a queenside majority in the outside. I have the kingside majority. I wouldn't want black, for example, to be able to play g5 and g4 in one move, and he kills my majority. So I've got to activate my majority, and the question for me was, if I play king d4 and he plays f5 and I play e4 and he takes and I take, was that a good decision for me? Would that be good decision? Or conversely, I could play e4, f4, e4, f4, e5 and try to get my majority going very quickly. In such positions, it's really terrible. There aren't really any wonderful principles to guide our decision. We simply have to calculate the position on its individual merits. So, gut reactions. Who thinks king d4 is a really good move? Who would say e4 is a pretty good move? Well, it's not, okay. So, in fact, king d4 is a real good move. I played e4. e4. And my opponent, Garry, really played perfectly to prove that in this position he has a forced win. It's like the move 40, forced win. We'll come back and I will look at king d4 and why I would have made a draw had I played that move. After the move e4, Garry played the move g6, g5, which is really a brilliant move, and I hadn't given that move a great deal of attention. For some reason, when I was oscillating between king d4 and e4, the move that had my attention the most was f5. g5, on the other hand, threatens to play g4, which would freeze my king side, and black would win very easily by just creating a pass pawn over on the queen side. f4 takes, king here. And now I realize, to my horror, like my pawns are frozen. The moment I play, for example, e5, my opponent's going to play king d5, so my pawns will remain frozen. Then I go a4, a5, b4, force a pass pawn, and then go king e4 and round up my pawns. So I had to wait. So we reached this position, and it's black to play. What should black play? What should black do? What do you think black should do? Okay. b4. Let's see why he didn't play b4. Okay, if he had played b4, I think, my plan was to play a4. Yeah, well, at the moment, my king is keeping his king out, and it's sort of like a tempo race. So, like, one thing he could do, for example, is try b3, king here, b2, king takes, king here. Ooh, that looks kind of interesting. Okay, but you have to work it out. King b3, king takes, king here, king takes, king here, here. Let's say here, let's say here, fifth, sixth, sixth, seventh, seventh, queen, queen. Now it's more than likely black is going to be able to pick up this pawn on h2, and we're getting into a queen ending, but my chances of drawing this are simply excellent. You don't have to play b3 right away. You could play other moves too, just cagily waiting for the right moment. So let's see how he did it. He played h5, very good move, h4, b4, a4, f6. Okay, so basically he's given the move to me. I don't want the move. I want it to be his turn. If I move my king, then I am losing to king c4. And that's very simple for him. He's just going to be able to push his pawn here, and he'll also gain the square d4 for his king. So I had to play f5. Okay. So now what black's winning strategy is, he wants this exact position, but he wants it to be my move. So black has to lose a turn. Okay. So how does black lose a turn? He does it through the method of triangulation. How many of you are familiar with triangulation? Very good. All right. It took me, I worked very hard to understand the idea of triangulation, but I think that this is a very nice example of it. King comes back. I keep his king in opposition. He goes back. I can't go forward and keep his king in opposition because I remain tied to the pawn on b3. So I have to make a turn. I wait. He waits. Now he's established what we call distant opposition. After I play here, he plays here, and he has exactly the same position as he wanted, and it's my turn. I ended up playing here, and I resigned as he's promoting his pawn with check. Ooh, that one hurt. That was a very, very hurtful one. How about another really good, hurtful game? Oh, I've had a lot of fun in king and pawn endings. Now, let's see. Leonid Shamkovich. Okay. This was a real disaster. Oh, gosh. Oh, gosh. This was very, very hard. I was white against a very, very strong grandmaster from the Soviet Union at the time. His name was Leonid Shamkovich. He eventually came to the United States as a defector, and when he was here, he played in U.S. championships, and boy, did he win a lot of tournaments. So I was 17 years old. We were playing in Lone Pine, California, and I had basically reached this overwhelming position as white. Like, all of my pieces are better. The pawn structure is better for me. I'm completely winning. And I get this position. Now today, I mean, I don't even know what I was thinking. Today, and without question, I would just take the bishop, take the pawn. 2 pawns up. Maybe I'm going to go rook here, or maybe rook over, and my king is coming up. I've got the better structure, and I'm 2 pawns ahead, and his pawns are all weak. No. That would have been a good move. I played rook here, and immediately went into a king and pawn endgame, a pawn up. This is completely winning. I mean, I'm just completely winning. This is nothing to be said. King can come over here. Pawn will come over. Once I put my king up over here and move my pawn here, I'll get a pass d pawn, and I'll win the game very, very easily. What's that? What is that as a move? Of course, of course, of course. It goes without saying that in king and pawn endgames, one of the things you very much ought to do, and do it very quickly, is activate your king. That's a good principle. I played f4 because I had a very clear idea in my head. I was going to go king f2, e4. He couldn't allow me to play e5, establishing a connected pass pawn. He would have to trade. I'll trade with my king. I'll go d4, d5, put my king on d4, and win very simply. So far so good. Now, for some strange reason, I still can't understand it today, many years later. e4 is just resigns. That just wins the game on the spot. e3. He goes king c5. Now, now I start wondering, have I blown it? I don't know. Did I blow it? I played king f3. He took, b7, b6. And now I played king e2. Okay, so my idea, very simply, was that if he goes king d4, I'll go king d2. He'll have to retreat with his king. I'll go king c3, and I'll get the position I want by just pushing my pawn, and he can resign. So he goes king b4. So I go king d2. He goes king b3. And I go, oops, what do I do now? Oh my gosh. I went king e2, he went king b4. Notice he didn't go king c3. Had he gone king c3, I would have played king e3, and I would have activated my king this way. Yeah? That did not happen. He played king, 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 king. And now the move he played was king b4. Okay. So now I played king d2, king f2, and I'm hoping for king to c3, so then I can go king to e3 and get him. He goes king to b3. Oh boy. What's going on? What did I do? I went king e1. So my idea was that if he goes king up, I'll go king up, and then I'll follow him, and eventually I'd force him out of troubles. He goes king c3. And when I played king e2, he said, that's 3-time repetition. No! Oh no! I made a draw from a completely won position. I didn't realize I'd made a 3-move repetition. That's something else that in king and pawn endgames, when you're trying to be really clever and make a lot of moves and win tempo, sometimes 3-time repetition could occur. This was a painful non-victory. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. But just to try to reestablish my reputation with yourselves, this one you're really going to love. Okay, which kind of combines both. So I was black. This was played in the Chess Olympiad of 1994. And let me see, which country was I think my opponent was an international master from Peru. So after lots and lots of, we get to a position like this. Okay. Hello, greetings. Okay. So king takes a3 was my opponent's last move, and it's black to play. Okay. Now here, I was very happy with my position. As I think you can understand, I have some very interesting choices, and 2 in particular have got my attention. The first choice I have is to play rook h5. My opponent would likely play king b4, and I could play rook takes h2 when I'm a pawn up in a rook ending. But let me just just a second, do something here. Notation, training, that's what I mean. So rook here. So this was, let us say, one of my main variations. My main analysis variation was that I was sitting there going, well, black really has good counterplay, because I was afraid that if I went h5, king here, h4 takes, first sight this looks really good until you see check. It's like, hate that. So I wouldn't be able to play h5. I'd probably have to bring my rook behind the pawn. And let's face it, white has good counterplay, good counter chances of making a draw with good play. The second thought that went through my mind was, what about check and going into this king and pawn endgame? Well, as you've just seen with my game with Garry Kasparov, you got to be a little bit worried when your opponent has a pass pawn on the queen side, because he may use it as a decoy to bring his king all the way and gobble your pawns on the king side. So the first point was, is this endgame favorable for me or for my opponent? Whereas maybe I should go into that rook ending and just play a pawn ahead. So I had to look very deeply into this position, because I wasn't sure whether I was winning, losing, or drawing. First impressions. Who thinks that white's winning? Who thinks that white's drawing? Who thinks that black's winning? Okay, well, the only reason I thought I was even in there with a chance was because I had this pawn on g4, which was basically keeping these three guys frozen. I made the decision to go into the king and pawn endgame, and all my teammates who were watching the game immediately got out, and they went out the playing hall to argue amongst themselves, like, you know, why didn't Yasser just go and take the pawn? Okay, so the next few moves were pretty straightforward, and we could reach here. Okay, so now I have ideas like I can move my pawn up here to e5, I can move my pawn to f5, and my opponent could be moving back and forth or back and forth like this, and eventually I'm going to have to move my pawns, and I'm going to have to make a breakthrough, just like Ivanchuk did against Jobava. But I have to do it in the right way so that the tempo is in my favor when I make the breakthrough. I played e5. Okay. My opponent played king d3, and I played f5, keeping my opponent's king away from the e4 square. He played king c3. So what's going on in my head is I'm thinking that I've got to play h4, f4, e4, and h4, all in the right move order. Okay? Now he can no longer play king here to d3, because that would allow king b4, and then he'd simply lose the c-pawn. So to maintain his c-pawn, he's going to be moving back and forth between b3 and c3. And while he's over in that way, that direction, I'm going to play e4, f4, e3. But I got to make sure his king's over there. So what move did I make? Okay, h5 is one move, and then he's going to go king b3. And then what can I do? So if I go h5, and he goes king b3, what could I do? If I go f4, he'll go king c3, and I have to be careful now that I'm not losing, because he's going to go king, so I have to go e4. He would take. Ooh. Does this look like Ivanchuk's game, where, remember, he had an f pawn and a c pawn? Ruh-roh. So what I did was, in this position, oops, just a second, I played e4. Ooh. Okay, so my idea was that he couldn't drop back with his king, because, let me just see, let me just make sure of this. Training, notation, yeah, e4. So h5, I think that move was just shown. Okay, so e4, king b3, h6, king c3, h5, king b3, f4. Ooh, so this is the breakthrough. So now he has to take here, take here. So now he cannot stop me from playing g3, takes h3, and I can go all the way up the board, or even to recapture. Okay, but this is the position I have seen before I went into the king and pawn ending. Ooh. But I was still not sure that this is winning for me. Why? Because he goes f5. So now I have to be careful. g3 does not win the game. For example, g3 takes f6. Now he's threatening to promote with check, right? So I've got to bring my king back. He'll check me. Ooh, I can't take the pawn, because then his f-pawn goes, and he goes like this. And now he's threatening to check. And white makes a queen. Ooh. So back to this position. After f5, I had to return with my king. King to d6. Okay. White cannot play f6. I'll go king here, c5, king takes. Sorry, let me put this on the board. White cannot play f6 because I'll go king here. I'll wipe out this pawn, and I'll be back in time to stop this pawn from making a queen. So we go back to this position. My opponent plays king b4. Okay, now let's see again. What about g3? Well, let's say he takes, and gives me a check. Ooh. Where do I move my king? Yes, and then? King e5. That's a good move. c6. Capture this pawn. Oops, we can't do that. c6. So c6, g2, c7, queen, oops, queen, queen. And I can't skewer white's queen. White's king doesn't go onto the c file, of course. That's a bad square. But it just makes its way to white's queen. and I should be happy to make a draw. Right. Okay, so I've seen this position in my mind, and I didn't play G3. G3 would not win the game. But which move did I play? And then King E5, correct. King E5. So here's the point. C5. Okay, I got to wipe this guy out. And then let's say he goes king here. Yes. And he goes king here. Then he goes king here. G3. Then he goes C6, check. Yeah, I blew it. Oh no. Hate that. So king here, king here. G3, correct. Takes. Take back. Push. Push. Whoops, sorry. Push. Push. Draw, agreed. Right? Yes. So we're here. Pardon me? Takes. Push. Correct. Now king b7. Ooh, very nice. After king b7, he walks into check.
Before you took on c4, what if he had played d5?
Let's go back. So we're back to this position. Before.
Right here. Instead of that, he plays d5.
Instead of that, he plays e4.
e4.
E4. Well, okay, then so a moment ago, we're kind of here, and essentially what he wants to do is to be able to advance his pawn with a tempo. And what my move king e5 does is it gets out of the tempo advance and it puts me in the square of the pawn. So after after e4 defending the pawn on d5, then I can just go ahead and make a queen. And his pawns are a long way from promotion. A long, long, long way from promotion. Yeah. One of the most difficult this ending, by the way, had all of those flavors, right? It had the pawns kind of split, the outside pass pawn, the majority, the pawn breakthroughs, finagling your opponent's king into a diagonal so that I could give a check when I promoted. And I think that one of the hardest and favorite positions. So I must have had cruel teachers. At least Jeffrey Parson took a great interest in making me struggle. So the idea, of course, was he gave me this position and he said white to move and win. And then I, of course, very happily thought, well, what I got to do is come over here and just take all of these pawns and win. So I would play king c5 and he would play king c7. And pretty soon, I would just get to a position that we would make a draw. And it's like, what am I doing wrong? Actually, I think on certain occasions, I'm not quite sure how I managed. I think I even managed to lose the position when I was black. I mean, it wasn't just good enough that he would give me a position and say white to move and win. I turned it into a loss. I was pretty good. I was very proud of myself. So of course I never solved this problem, making a long story short, right? And when he did have mercy on me and he showed me the solution, it really, like, wow, it just blew me away. And you all know the solution, right? Yeah.
The middle pawn.
The middle pawn? Correct. Push the middle pawn. G5, G6. And I just love this breakthrough. This one I really did get right away. This was really cute. Okay. That one I thought was really charming. This one didn't come quite so readily. For some reason, I had a great idea in the powers of the king, and it really took me quite some time to realize that black's king is too slow. It seemed like the black king would just instantly be at the gate to defend the pawn from promotion, and this one didn't come readily. But these pawn breakthroughs are really, really some of the most charming of king and pawn endgames. When you try to study king and pawn endgames, the way I personally found king and pawn endgames to be both far too challenging and at times far too boring, right? So it's like, you got to weigh the scales of like being bored to death and then, just not being able to solve and find the answers. So I set up a little imagery with myself, and what I tried to do was take out a chess clock and give myself 10 minutes to solve the position and to imagine I was playing for the US Championship. That the outcome of the game decided the US Championship, and if I could figure out the problem and get it right, I'd become the US champion. So trying to put myself under a tournament stressful condition was the way I tried to study king and pawn endgames. I didn't always get it right, but I can tell you there's some really, really fascinating and complex materials on king and pawn endgames. Again, I would say that the most important principles of the king and pawn endgame to realize is who's got the most active king. Like a lot of king and pawn endgames boils down to that. Second one, who has the more important passed pawn? You'll often see those king and pawn endgames with the passed pawns for both players, but one of the pawns is more important than the other. And the third principle is that there really isn't any principle other than you're going to have to calculate each and every position. It's unique. And, well, those are the principles of king and pawn endgame. Questions? 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 Have any of you played a king and pawn endgame in your tournament careers? They're not very common. Okay, they're not very common. Normally speaking, a lot of them may not be challenging. In other words, you may already have been winning horribly like I was winning with Shamkovich and just transposed into an easily winning king and pawn endgame and then you blew it. Well, or you just simply won it. Or you were able to draw it. But these king and pawn endgames are really, really worth studying. It's hard at times to bring yourself up to the task, but make an effort. Make an effort. May help you win an important tournament game.